let's take a look at a vehicle. This is a 2004 Crown Victoria, 4.6 liter engine. It's got 96,000 miles on it. The mill is on, and it runs okay according to the customer. We bring it in, we look at our DTCs and our freeze frame data. And a couple of things are worth noting here. First of all, we have a P0171 and a P0174. Bank 1 and Bank 2 are lean. If we take a look at our long-term fuel trim PIDs, long-term fuel trim 1 is at about 26%. Fuel trim 2 is 27%. And this is happening at about 1200 RPM at about 30 miles an hour. Our throttle position sensor indicates about 25% open. So the freeze frame indicates that the lean condition occurred while the driver was applying throttle. Now, one thing this will really help me rule out is a vacuum leak. It's not a very likely cause. So the other possibility that we can rule out with this freeze frame, due to the fact that Ford presents their fuel rail pressure sensor information on the freeze frame, is the fuel rail pressure PID, indicating that we're probably not running out of gasoline under this light load cruise type condition. Now here we see the scan data collected at idle. Again, we have around 55 psi fuel rail pressure. We have a long-term fuel trim of almost 15% on Bank 1 and Bank 2. Our mass airflow sensor is about 0.9 volts, which is not unusual for a Ford. Grams per second at idle are pretty close to the engine displacement, which kind of helps also rule out a vacuum leak. Okay? So, you know, while it's not totally impossible, the vacuum leak's really not looking too good right now. The technician checks for vacuum leaks real quick just by bringing the engine RPM up, and he sees that the fuel trim numbers don't correct as he brings it off idle. Remember, the fuel pressure PID is looking okay on the freeze frame, so the list is getting kind of short on us now. That could cause P0171, 172, two simultaneously bad O2 sensors. I don't know. This technician says to himself, I think I'm going to check the fuel. So he gets a sample of fuel, and he gets it in a bottle, and he notices that it's clear and it's weak smelling, and he's wondering if it's E85. He walks around to the back of the car, and he doesn't see the emblem for Flex Fuel. He looks at the filler neck. He doesn't see a Flex Fuel cap. So he's pretty sure that what this guy did with the car is to put E85 in a non-Flex Fuel vehicle. Well, the poor man's E85 test includes using a pop bottle and then adding some water to the sample. The sample out of this car is on the left-hand side. And as you can see, because of the alcohol content, the water immediately mixed with the alcohol and our fuel became cloudy. The sample on the right-hand side is gasoline with water. Here's the line, and the gasoline is sitting on top of the water. The water is heavier and sinks to the bottom of the pop bottle. So this is what came out of our car. This is just to give you an example of what it would have looked like if water would have been in the fuel. How are we going to repair the Crown Vic? This is not a Flex Fuel vehicle. However, the fuel system should be okay. This particular vehicle was built with an E85 compatible fuel system, so the likelihood of damage is pretty low. So the repair consists of emptying the fuel tank and adding pure gasoline to the tank. Now, the technician is going to make sure he's got his facts straight. He's going to retest the car. Now, one thing that he notices right away is the short-term fuel trim on Bank 2 is much different than the short-term fuel trim on Bank 1. Now, this is before he clears the Keep Alive memory in the car. Note that short-term fuel trim Bank 1 is subtracting a lot, trying to correct down this 14% long-term fuel trim that's on Bank 1 that's no longer needed because we're running pure gasoline. Short-term fuel trim 2 doesn't seem to be responding properly. Well, if we think about the fuel system for a minute, we're going to realize that Bank 2, that this is a returnless fuel system, and Bank 2 is the furthest from the fuel inlet on the fuel rail. So it's going to take us a few minutes to run enough pure gasoline through the fuel rail and the injectors to get the Bank 2 oxygen sensor to start reacting. A few minutes later, we can see our short-term fuel trim on bank 2 and bank 1 are both subtracting and trying to correct this learned fuel trim that occurred because of the introduction of E85. Well, to finish the job, the Keep Alive memory is cleared and the vehicle is driven so that the fuel trim can learn properly. And we see that our fuel trims are pretty close to zero, and this guy dodged the bullet on this Crown Vic. So to recap what we've covered, if E85 is used in a non-E85 vehicle, we can expect a hard start cold and a rough run cold. Now, the vehicle that we just looked at came into the dealership in South Carolina when it was about 100 degrees out, and the customer didn't complain of any types of drivability complaints, but that's because they didn't let the car get cold and sit overnight. The next morning, I can assure you this car would have had some drivability problems. Also remember, we're going to have high fuel trim and possible component damage. Make sure to check the gas cap before refueling. Make sure the customer knows that he shouldn't put E85 in a non-E85 car. Something else you might want your customers to think about is when they're buying fuel, to make sure they take a look at that gas pump and don't find a sticker on there that says this fuel contains 15% ethanol. That might cause some problems.